The true history of the Second World War is full of strategic paradoxes, but none of them was as devastating to the enemy as the sudden discovery that the laws of physics and mathematics, on which the entire military doctrine was based, were refuted by the roar of engines. The most brilliant strategists of the Wehrmacht were absolutely sure that General Patton's army was doomed to an inevitable standstill based on the mathematically precise law of war, which they themselves wrote. On the 19th of August, 1944, while at the headquarters of the Wehrmacht in East Prussia, Oberst General Alfred Jodl carefully studied the latest intelligence reports from the crumbling Western Front. His staff officers had thoroughly calculated the limits of the Allied supply lines, which stretched more than 400 miles from the beaches of Normandy to the front line of General Patton's Third Army. The calculation was categorical. The Americans were ahead of them in logistical support. Patton had to stop for several days, if not hours, since no army is capable of maintaining such high offensive speeds without a constant supply of fuel. While at Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, Jodl analyzed the situation based on the experience shared by every German general. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily during the offensive. Considering that the Americans were 400 miles away from their supply depots, the withdrawal was inevitable. Patton's Third Army would get bogged down, which would give the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Seine and possibly hold the front until winter set in. What Jodl didn't know was that 125 miles away, 5,958 trucks were already moving east in an endless convoy with their headlights on, contrary to military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of cargo every 24 hours. Operation Red Ball Express, a logistical plan so daring that German military science could not even imagine that it was possible, was ready to destroy all ideas of mechanized warfare. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks had broken through the German positions at the Seine. They will liberate Paris in a week. In a month, they will be standing on the border with Germany. The best military minds of the Wehrmacht were going to receive a lesson in American logistics, which was supposed to change their understanding of modern warfare. The delivery was carried out by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of whom were African American, who turned the one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German General Staff's confidence in the failure of American logistical support was based on many years of military experience and recent observations. The Wehrmacht pioneered the Blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and perfectly understood the tyranny of supply lines. Their own campaigns repeatedly stalled when logistics couldn't keep up with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's offensive was initially caused not by the resistance of Soviet troops, but by a simple inability to supply troops over long distances. German trucks were breaking down on the broken roads. Horse-drawn wagons, which still made up 80% of German military transport, could not match the speed of Panzer's advance troops.
The difference in the width of the railway track meant that supplies were being accumulated hundreds of miles from the front line. Panzer General Heinrich von Leutwitz, who commanded Panzer's 47th Corps in September 1944, wrote in July that the Americans were facing the same logistical difficulties that Germany faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machinery requires fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. They had traveled 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what will happen next: paralysis. German intelligence carefully monitored the level of consumption. One Sherman tank consumed 0.5 gallons of fuel per mile on the roads. The infantry division needed 700 tons of food per day. The armored division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The math seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons of cargo must be transported 400 miles from the beaches every day along damaged roads using the transport network that the Germans systematically destroyed during their retreat. Major General Siegfried Westphal, who will become Field Marshal von Rundstedt's Chief of Staff in September, calculated on August 20th that even if the Americans had an unlimited number of trucks, which they do not have, and perfect roads that did not exist, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still would not be able to support Patton's advance for more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, even by American industry. At 14 o'clock on the 25th of August 1944, in a requisitioned French castle near La, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service stood in front of a room full of skeptical officers. The math they presented was harsh. Patton's Third Army was expending supplies faster than any other army in history, advancing at a speed that defied any planning. Traditional methods of supply, rail transport, regular convoys, distribution in warehouses, collapsed under the strain. "Gentlemen," Ayres announced, "we are going to build a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front line. Each vehicle will operate for 20 hours out of 24, no stops except for refueling and emergencies. We will transport at least 12,500 tons per day." The name comes from railway terminology. The transportation of the Red Ball was an express shipment that took precedence over everything else. The Red Ball Express will operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical characteristics of this operation completely contradicted the German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, round-the-clock operation with the headlights on, which was a refusal to comply with the rules of blackout. A policy has been adopted prohibiting stops except in cases of refueling and mechanical failures. There are 5-minute intervals between the columns at an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Mobile repair crews were stationed every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints allowed any vehicle to pass at speeds below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commander of the Advanced Communications Zone Unit, analyzed the projected figures. "We need 140 cargo companies, at least 5,958 units of equipment that will operate with 90% readiness. This is not possible in any logistics textbook that has ever been written." Nevertheless, within 36 hours, the impossible was accomplished.
On August 26, 1944, drivers from the quartermaster's 3,916th Cargo Company boarded their 2.5-ton GMC CCKW trucks, nicknamed 2.5, loaded with 105mm artillery shells, which were heading for the Patton guns in Melun, 300 miles to the east. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually work on this route, approximately 75% were African-American soldiers serving in the still segregated army. These people, who were denied equal rights and amenities for whites in most of their homeland, supported the movement of the most famous army of white generals. Drivers had created their own culture in a matter of hours. They painted slogans on their trucks: "Patton Blood Bank," "Hitler, we are coming," "Express from Detroit to Berlin." They've introduced their own rules of the road. Slower cars immediately pulled over to the side of the road. Faulty cars collided into ditches. Any truck with a speed of less than 20 miles per hour was considered an obstacle on the road. On August 28th, German intelligence units began reporting unprecedented incidents. Units of the 116th Reconnaissance Aviation Group radioed from positions overlooking the main highway of the Krasny Shar about a continuous column of vehicles, the headlights of which are visible at a distance of 20 kilometers. No intervals, no discipline regarding blackout. An estimated 1,000 cars per hour. The Americans have abandoned all military precautions. This was contrary to all the principles of German military doctrine. The headlights at night could provoke an air attack. Continuous columns provided ideal targets for artillery. The lack of intervals between cars meant that one damaged truck could stop an entire convoy. However, the Americans didn't seem bothered by this. Lieutenant General Edgar Fung, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from hidden positions on August 30. His report to the headquarters of Army Group B reflected his growing concern. "The enemy's supply system is beyond our understanding. Cars pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without stopping. We understand that they don't hide, they don't disperse, they don't follow any rules. This is not military science. This is mass production used for combat operations." What the Germans couldn't understand was that American logistics worked on completely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized secrecy, the Americans relied on volume. Where the Germans were saving vehicles, the Americans assumed a 20% mechanical failure and planned accordingly. Where the Germans followed strict military procedures, the Americans were constantly improvising. The figures achieved with the Red Ball Express did not match German calculations of what was possible from a logistical point of view. In the first week from the 25th to the 31st of August 1944, 89,939 tons of cargo were delivered. The average daily rate was 12,848 tons. The round-trip distance was 686 miles. 5,958 trucks participated in the rotation, making 1.5 flights daily. 300,000 gallons of fuel were used for the operation itself. German logistics experts took these figures from American documents and called them propaganda, but the numbers were real and they were increasing.
By the 5th of September, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed impossible to the German logistics specialists, who still relied 80% on horse-drawn carts. Convoys departed from the western terminal every 5 minutes. On average, there were 67 vehicles in the convoy. The standard load on the vehicle was 5 tons. The frequent overload was 7 tons. The average time to travel 350 miles in one direction was 14 hours. The work time on each side is 2 hours. The number of vehicles in constant motion was 5,000 at any given time. The Red Ball Express innovated hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, and this happened to about 1,800 cars every day, mobile repair crews carried out repairs right on the roadsides. The mechanics developed a truck sorting system that allowed them to be either repaired or removed from the road in 15 minutes. Spare parts were withdrawn from cars that were considered defective. The engines were replaced in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When there were traffic jams on the route specially designated for the Red Ball, drivers found alternative routes. They commandeered French buses to transport personnel and freed trucks to transport supplies. They borrowed German cars, repainted them olive gray, and put them into service. They built detours around the destroyed bridges, using the rubble of bombed buildings as a roadway. The Germans, watching this chaos which somehow brought order, could not understand this. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, but their system accelerated, not collapsed.
The most striking discovery for German observers was the American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily for its own needs alone, which exceeded the reserves of many German armies. Nevertheless, there was no shortage. The Americans have created a parallel miracle, Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean. Underwater fuel pipelines laid across the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel was being supplied through pipes that German intelligence had not even detected. Advanced fuel depots were located every 25 miles along the route. Major General Walter Willemont, who observed this from aerial photographs, stated, "The Americans have more fuel depots than all our strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline by transporting gasoline than we allocate to entire tank divisions. This is not a war as we understand it. This is an industrial surplus." The Red Ball Express didn't just ensure Patton's advancement, it multiplied his speed. German military doctrine assumed that a panzer division could advance 20 to 30 miles a day under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by Express, advanced an average of 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in the morning and stopped for refueling at noon. The Red Ball trucks were already waiting with fuel and ammunition, and the division advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This 60-mile dash in one day completely destroyed the German defensive plans, which assumed a maximum of 30 miles per day. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing the reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles a day for a week. Mechanical failures by themselves do not allow this, he argued. However, intercepted American radio traffic confirmed this. More worrisome for the German commanders was that the Americans broadcast their positions in plain text without using encryption, being absolutely confident in their ability to move faster than the Germans could react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had prepared comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The conclusions were disastrous for the Wehrmacht's planning. Every assumption about American military capabilities needed to be reconsidered. The report contained observations that contradicted German military science. The Americans used vehicles with incredible carelessness, abandoning damaged trucks instead of repairing them. The drivers worked on stimulants for several days, violating all principles of personnel management. The lack of camouflage discipline made the entire system vulnerable to an air attack, which never followed. The daily mechanical failure rate of 30% was simply overwhelmed by redundancy. Fuel consumption could bankrupt any European army. Field Marshal Walter Modell's response reflected the growing desperation. If these reports are accurate, we are not facing a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they are not afraid of us. They are wasting resources because they have endless resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The drivers of the Red Ball Express paid a physical price that the German observers did not see. 300 drivers died as a result of accidents during the operation of the Express. The drivers worked for 72 hours straight, suffering from hallucinations due to exhaustion and stimulants. Trucks collided in the fog, overturned on damaged roads, and burned out due to overheating engines. Nevertheless, morale remained unusually high. These people, most of them African Americans, who were denied equal rights in their homeland, understood that they were making history. They refuted Hitler's racial theories with every mile traveled, every ton of cargo delivered. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony about the influence of the Red Balloon Express. Oberst Hans von Luck, who was captured in September 1944, told investigators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply chain. You're breaking all the rules. You waste fuel, abandon vehicles, and exhaust drivers, but you thrive on sheer volume. You have industrialized war beyond our comprehension." The psychological blow to the German troops was devastating. The Wehrmacht soldiers heard American trucks all night, every night, the endless rumble of engines, the endless flow of supplies. They had 3 rounds of ammunition for the rifle, while the Americans were carrying millions. The sound itself has become a psychological weapon. The vehicles themselves, the 2.5-ton GMC CCKW trucks that became the basis of the Red Ball Express, represented mass-produced perfection. General Motors had produced more than 500,000 of these trucks by the end of the war, which exceeded the entire Wehrmacht fleet of all types combined. The trucks featured innovations that had not been implemented in Germany. All-wheel drive as standard, automatic tire pumping systems, water resistance that allowed them to cross a ford 30 inches deep, engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modifications, and heaters that actually worked in winter. Even more striking was the American philosophy of maintenance. Where the Germans restored the engines, the Americans simply replaced them. Where the Germans were saving spare parts, the Americans were throwing away entire vehicles because of minor problems. Where the Germans had a master mechanic, the Americans had thousands of competent mechanics who could do 80% of the repair work.
As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with a speed that stunned German planning officers accustomed to weeks of preparation for major logistical changes. When the original route became insufficient, the Americans created extensions of the Red Ball Express overnight. The White Balloon Express from Rouen to Paris. The Green Diamond from Cherbourg to the transshipment points. The Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels. Each new track started operating within 48 hours of its creation. It took weeks for German staff officers to plan similar operations. The Americans simply applied new markers, assigned trucks, and started moving. The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists.
The Nazi ideology declared blacks to be inferior, incapable of technical tasks, and devoid of initiative. Nevertheless, these drivers performed logistical miracles that the German forces could not match. The African-American soldiers understood the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, and that made them work even harder. Every mile they traveled proved Hitler wrong. They fought racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology with superior performance. Some German prisoners who were forced to work as movers on the Red Ball saw their worldview crumble when they worked alongside African-American sergeants who calculated weight distribution faster than German engineers. The Red Ball Express required an infrastructure that the Germans considered impossible to create in combat conditions. Engineers have built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 large fuel depots, installed 26 repair stations, and built 8 temporary cities for drivers. And all this while the operation was going on. The bridge in Montville was destroyed by German engineers specifically to stop American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated that the replacement would take at least 6 weeks. American engineers built a temporary bridge in just 14 hours, while the Red Ball columns traveled only 8 miles around the obstacle along hastily laid bypass roads. German engineers watched American construction methods with amazement. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. They built faster than the Germans could destroy. One achievement of the Red Ball Express particularly stunned the German artillery officers: the speed of ammunition delivery, which exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restrictions, which was a luxury that no German unit had known since 1942. During the fighting for the fortifications of Metz in September 1944, the artillery of the 19th Corps fired 100,000 shells in 24 hours. The Red Ball delivered every shell plus 20% of the excess. The German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 shells per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. The American guns fired continuously for several hours, while the German artillery officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 shipments of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided this without pauses.
The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles on a scale that would have paralyzed any other army. By the end of September, mechanical wear had reached staggering proportions. The average service life of a vehicle was 10,000 miles, with a normal service life of 30,000. The daily failure rate was 30% of all vehicles. 500 engines were replaced weekly. The tire consumption was 10,000 per week. The total number of destroyed or abandoned vehicles exceeded 5,000. However, the speed of the operation has never slowed down. The American industry had anticipated such losses. The ships arrived weekly at French ports with hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained for 2 days and sent to convoys. German calculations show that the Americans destroyed more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht had in France in total. However, their transportation capacity was growing, not decreasing. They achieved what the Germans considered impossible. Logistics began to outpace consumption. French citizens along the Red Balloon route witnessed American abundance that belied years of German occupation austerity. The psychological impact on the occupied population was immediate and profound. The drivers of the Red Balloon Express, especially African Americans, often shared their rations with French citizens despite all the regulations. Children gathered at each stop, and the drivers handed out chocolates, cigarettes, and soap to them. The contrast with the German occupation was striking. The Americans casually gave away what the Germans strictly counted. German intelligence reported on the propaganda effect. French citizens now consider an American victory inevitable. They cite the columns of trucks as evidence. Resistance activity has increased by 400% along the routes of the Red Ball. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its most serious challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Express was struggling to maintain supply standards. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers collapsed from exhaustion. Vehicles crumbled. German intelligence detected the tension. Panzer General Hasso von Monteuffel reported on September 8th,
The American supply lines are showing signs of collapse. The intervals between the columns increased from 5 to 15 minutes. The speed of the vehicles has decreased. This is our chance. But American adaptability surprised the Germans again. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized, created intermediate transshipment points, reducing individual flights to 350 miles, introduced driver rotation systems, created advanced maintenance bases, and doubled the number of vehicles involved. By September 12th, the volume of tonnage delivered had actually increased. The crisis that was supposed to stop Patton only made the system stronger. Complementing the Red Ball Express, the Americans introduced another logistical solution that the Germans considered impossible: large-scale aerial supply. The C-47 transport planes began delivering critical supplies directly to the frontline units. Each plane carried 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 transport flights in one day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at the zenith of its efforts, managed 300 tons daily for Stalingrad and considered it a maximum effort. The Americans used transport planes as trucks. The Wehrmacht could not compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated in accordance with the principles of command, which violated the German military hierarchy. Junior officers made decisions that in the Wehrmacht were reserved for generals. Sergeants commanded operations on a scale greater than that of the German colonels. This decentralization has puzzled German observers. American logistics operated without obvious centralized control. Each lieutenant acted as a general, each sergeant as a colonel. Chaos was supposed to be the result, but instead they achieved efficiency. The Wehrmacht could not match this, having a rigid hierarchy.
By October 1944, the advancement of railways began to reduce the need for the Red Ball Express. The operation, which was supposed to last 10 days, lasted 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of cargo over a distance of 122 million ton-miles. The German commanders, who were now fighting on their borders, reflected on what they had seen. Field Marshal Jodl wrote in his final report, "We were defeated not by American tanks or planes, but primarily by American trucks." The Red Ball Express proved that logistics is a strategy in modern warfare. The switch to rail transport was a miracle in itself. American railroad engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French railway lines while the Red Balloon was operating. They were paving new paths faster than the Germans could destroy them. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express refuted all German calculations of logistical possibilities. 82 days of work, 412,193 tons of cargo delivered, 222 million ton-miles. An average of 5,958 vehicles, with a peak of 7,000. There are only 23,000 drivers involved. 700,000 gallons of fuel were consumed daily. 40,000 tons of ammunition were delivered to Patton alone. 15 million food rations and 135,000 tons of medicines were transported. Studying these figures in captivity, the German officers admitted that they had calculated American logistics based on European precedent. They multiplied their best figures by 3 and assumed that this was the American maximum. They were 10 times wrong. Beyond tonnage and distance, the Red Ball Express has achieved something deeper. He destroyed the German belief in his own military superiority. The officers of the Wehrmacht, who considered Americans to be pampered and dependent on mechanics, watched as the same Americans performed logistical miracles thanks to determination and industrial abundance. German prisoners of war stood silently at the fences of the camps, counting the passing trucks of the Red Ball. Some were crying. They understood what this meant. The Americans could not just supply their armies, they could squander more than the Germans could produce. They watched their worldview crumble, one truck at a time.
The Red Ball Express provoked an unexpected racial reappraisal in the American Army itself. The success of the operation overwhelmingly depended on African American soldiers who were still segregated, deprived of equal treatment, and access to combat roles. General Eisenhower, who visited the operational bases of the Red Ball in September 1944, witnessed this contradiction firsthand. His assistant, Captain Harry Butcher, wrote, "The general stood watching the colored drivers who worked 20 hours in a row. He said, 'These people are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to review a lot of things.'" The success created pressure for integration, which contributed to the desegregation of the Army. 3 years later, African American soldiers in France proved what they had always known. If they have the tools and capabilities, they will not be inferior to anyone. The Red Ball was their fight, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists have struggled to explain this contradiction. SS publications on racial science simply stopped mentioning American logistical operations. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny, and too devastating to admit.
German military engineers intensively studied the operations of the Red Ball Express after the war. These lessons have revolutionized logistics thinking around the world. Volume overcomes inefficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates vulnerability. Decentralized execution ensures speed. Standardization multiplies the possibilities. There are limits to human endurance, but they are higher than expected. General Franz Halder, the former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determine strategy and not the other way around. The Americans have understood this. We found out too late." Among the 23,000 drivers of the Red Ball, individual stories of heroism appeared which the Germans found incomprehensible within their military structure. Corporal John L. Houston drove the truck continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division in Cambrai. He fell asleep at the wheel 3 times, but continued on his way after being revived by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheating brakes while he was transporting medical supplies. Instead of abandoning him, as required by the procedure, he drove the burning car 2 miles to the field hospital, jumping out when the flames reached the cabin. The supplies delivered saved the wounded soldiers of both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to German observers: individual initiative, calculated risk, and task fulfillment above compliance with regulations. In desperation, the German troops tried to create their own version of the Red Ball Express at the end of 1944. Operation Vulture, during the Battle of the Bulge, included plans to use captured American trucks to establish German supply lines. The attempt immediately failed. German drivers couldn't keep up with American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough. German fuel reserves could not maintain consumption rates. Most importantly, the Germans could not replicate the American attitude towards unlimited resources. Oberst, the commander of the operation, reported, "We have captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were out of service. The Americans would replace them. We tried to repair them. This difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944 and 45 became the final test of the Red Ball Express. Icy rain, snow, and ice should have stopped the wheeled transport. German doctrine stated that wheeled logistics became impossible at temperatures below -10 degrees Celsius. Nevertheless, the Red Ball Express continued to operate. The speed dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but the volume of tonnage delivered continued. German observers reported ice-covered columns moving through snowstorms that stopped panzer divisions. The Americans created a logistics system that functioned regardless of the weather, terrain, or enemy actions. She wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but she was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study the operations of the Red Ball Express for historical purposes.
Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. Infantry General Franz Schulz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents a war we never imagined. The Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of people, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of cargo that existed only to feed the armies and then dissolved when they were no longer needed. We have been building a permanent infrastructure for years. They have created excellent timing systems in days." The most insightful analysis came from General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare. "We invented the Blitzkrieg, but we never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. The Americans solved it through industrial surplus, which we considered impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of materials that drowned our forces."
The Red Ball Express cost the United States of America approximately $100 million at prices in 1944. German staff officers, accustomed to managing shortages, found this figure unfathomable. Nevertheless, Americans considered it low. The operation captured 400,000 German soldiers, liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Every day of the war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in 1 day of reduced conflict. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, commander of logistics in the European theater, said, "We have worn out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 people to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, this would have been a catastrophic loss. In the American Industrial War, this is an acceptable overhead." The unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers have returned to America with experience managing the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded transportation companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. They learned in France that volume trumps inefficiency, speed trumps perfection, and if you can get trucks moving for 24 hours, you can move the world. Military historians unanimously recognize the Red Ball Express as a crucial logistical operation of the European theater. Without him, Patton's offensive would have stopped, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and German forces would have successfully established winter defensive lines. The operation confirmed American military doctrine, which emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuvering, Americans studied Detroit's assembly lines and railroad schedules. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for several hours, he convened his headquarters. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we are facing something that is beyond a military solution. The Americans have a supply chain that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culmination point, where the advancing forces overtake the supply. This point does not exist. They revolutionized the war, and we are fighting in the last one." His operations officers suggested cutting the routes of the Red Ball Express with the remnants of the Luftwaffe. Von Rundstedt's response showed complete understanding. "What are we going to cut? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we can't do, they'll replace them in a week. We need to destroy 200 trucks every day just to match their production. We don't have 200 planes." Behind the statistics were human stories that revealed the American character to German observers. Drivers who had not slept for 3 days refused to rest because their trucks might not reach their destination. Mechanics working in the icy rain to keep the columns moving. Teenagers who lied about their age to drive trucks.
Such stories multiplied throughout the operation created a mythology that demoralized the German forces. Americans were not pampered, as the propaganda claimed. They exhausted themselves more than the Germans exhausted the horses, but they did it voluntarily, not out of fear. This made them more dangerous than German doctrine understood. The Red Ball Express has become an unintended propaganda more powerful than any planned operation. German soldiers could hear the columns at night, the endless streams of engines that never stopped. The sound itself has become a psychological weapon. American psychological warfare units, realizing this effect, began broadcasting the sounds of truck engines towards the German positions even when there were no real columns. German units reported these phantom columns as real, demonstrating the psychological damage caused by the Red Ball Express.
In November 1944, with the partial restoration of railway lines, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. But his methods forever revolutionized military logistics. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful but efficient supply became an American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. A large-scale operation, 23,000 people, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of structures, disappeared in 72 hours. Troops were reassigned, vehicles were redistributed, and routes were returned to civilian use. It took the Germans months to establish smaller operations and years to disband them. The Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When the German generals surrendered in May 1945, many of them referred to the Red Ball Express as proof of the hopelessness of continuing resistance. Panzer General Hasso von Montefil stated during the interrogation, "When we realized your logistical ability, we knew that the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon that we had no defense against." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of the most competent German commanders, when asked what surprised him most about the American troops, replied, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express has shown us that you have militarized the entire production capacity of your society. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." The Red Ball Express cost the United States of America approximately $100 million in 1944. German staff officers found this figure incomprehensible. Nevertheless, the Americans considered it cheap. The operation secured the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Every day of the war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in 1 day of reduced conflict. Lieutenant General John Cy Lee, commander of logistics, said, "We have worn out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 people to destroy the German army in France. In the American Industrial War, this is an acceptable overhead." In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the Normandy landings, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp in honor of the Red Balloon Express. The veterans who attended the ceremony spoke of their pride in the operation, which proved that American industrial might and individual determination can overcome any obstacle. They won the war by being segregated, discriminated against, and denied recognition during the war, but they delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that logistics is not a support in modern warfare. She is the main effort. It showed that industrial democracy can mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency could not match. The final verdict was delivered by the captured Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who, after studying the reports, stated, "We are faced with something that is beyond the military solution. The Americans have created a supply chain that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culmination point, where the advancing forces overtake the supply. This point does not exist." General George S. Patton, whose army was the main beneficiary, wrote a final tribute. "The drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much praise for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. Without them, the Third Army does not move. We don't win without movement. They were mostly African American soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, and denied recognition, but they won the war as surely as any shooter. History must record this truth.
The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact reverberated through military history. It proved that in the industrial age, victory does not belong to the bravest soldiers or the most brilliant generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest.